October 14th, 2021. A crisp autumn morning blanketed the quiet suburb of Concord, Massachusetts, with the gentle orange glow of sunrise. Birds chirped softly among the trees, and the neighborhood seemed untouched by anything sinister. But inside the elegant colonial-style home of Margaret Lawson, that serenity had been shattered in an instant. Margaret's daughter, Elaine Lawson, had called 911 just after 7 a.m. to report a horrifying scene. Her mother, and 68, had fallen down the staircase and was unconscious. The operator's voice crackled in the background as Elaine's trembling words poured out. I don't know what happened. She just fell. Please, hurry." When the paramedics arrived, it was clear something had gone terribly wrong. Margaret Lawson lay at the foot of the stairs, her body twisted unnaturally, her breathing shallow. Despite immediate efforts, she passed away before reaching the hospital. The tragedy seemed straightforward, an accidental fall in the home she had lived in for decades. A quiet, accidental death that could happen to anyone. But something about the case gnawed at Detective Laura Reynolds, a seasoned investigator with the Concord Police Department. The accident report seemed routine, yet as she reviewed the details, her instincts screamed that there was more than met the eye. Elaine Lawson, 42, was the only person home at the time. She was composed enough to speak clearly to paramedics and police, yet there was a subtle tension in her voice, a nervousness that didn't match someone who had just witnessed a tragic accident. She repeatedly insisted, "It was just a fall. Mom was always a bit clumsy on the stairs. I don't know what else to say." But the questions began to stack up. Margaret's best friend had told the police that the woman was careful, meticulous even. She had renovated the stairs just 2 years prior to make them safer after a minor slip. No one else in the family had ever heard of her mother having a dangerous fall before, and Elaine's insistence that it was simply an accident struck some officers as rehearsed. The turning point came when Detective Reynolds and her partner, Detective Mark Sullivan, were called to the Lawson residence to collect statements and examine the scene. The home was immaculate, almost pristine, as if prepared for visitors rather than a tragedy. Family photographs lined the hallway. A faint smell of cinnamon lingered in the air, a remnant of the morning coffee Margaret had poured before she died. But something about the scene set off a small nagging alarm in Detective Reynolds' mind. The staircase, while polished and secure, bore subtle signs that didn't fit the story of a simple fall. A small smear of blood on the handrail, a footprint partially smudged on the edge of the top step. Nothing overt, but enough to suggest movement that didn't match Elaine's account. The detectives left the scene with more questions than answers. The coroner's preliminary report confirmed blunt force trauma consistent with a fall. Still, the instincts that had guided Reynolds through decades of homicide cases screamed at her something was off. The first break in the case came unexpectedly. A few days after the accident, Margaret Lawson's will, which had been filed months earlier, arrived at the law firm handling her estate. The document was straightforward in its legal language, almost sterile, but nestled in the fine print was something that made Detective Reynolds' heart skip a beat. Margaret had explicitly disinherited Elaine from any substantial inheritance, leaving the bulk of her estate to her younger sister, Vivian Harper, and several charitable organizations. Suddenly, the pieces started to shift. Could Elaine's insistence on it being an accident mask something more sinister? Was there a financial motive hiding behind her grief? The detectives began to dig into the family dynamics, uncovering years of tension, whispered arguments, and subtle resentment that had simmered between mother and daughter. Neighbors described Elaine as loving but occasionally controlling, someone who had always struggled with her mother's independence and outspoken nature. Margaret was a strong woman, one neighbor recounted. Elaine, she loved her, but she had a way of wanting things her way. You could see it in how she talked about her mother sometimes. The investigation was just beginning, and the story that seemed so simple, a tragic fall on a quiet morning, was starting to unravel. Detective Reynolds realized that uncovering the truth would require digging through layers of family secrets, hidden resentments, and the subtle but telling details left behind in the Lawson home. And somewhere within those layers, she feared, was the answer to the question that haunted her every step. Did Elaine Lawson cause her mother's death, or was it truly an accident? Detective Reynolds couldn't shake the image of Margaret Lawson's body lying at the foot of that staircase. On the surface, it looked like a tragic accident, a fall in a home she had known intimately for decades. But the more Reynolds dug, the more subtle inconsistencies began to appear. Elaine Lawson had a quiet life, or at least that's what she portrayed. A single woman in her early 40s, she worked as an administrative coordinator at a small law firm in Boston. She lived alone in her mother's house since Margaret had retired, and neighbors described her as polite, friendly, almost invisible, the kind of person you'd notice only if you were paying attention. Yet beneath that calm exterior, Detective Reynolds began to uncover patterns that hinted at a more complicated story. Statements from colleagues painted Elaine as ambitious, meticulous, and occasionally impatient with her mother's choices. Margaret, for her part, had a strong-willed personality. She refused to move into a smaller home, resisted Elaine's suggestions about selling the family house, and had made it clear she valued her independence even over her daughter's expectations. The detectives also began to look at financial records. Margaret Lawson was careful with her money, a woman who planned meticulously for her estate. Elaine's inheritance was limited by design, a decision Margaret had documented in a series of letters to her lawyer over the past 2 years. Every major asset, the house, investments, and even her savings account had been earmarked for her sister Vivian or charitable organizations. When Reynolds confronted Elaine about the will, her reaction was telling. She claimed she hadn't seen the document yet, that she was still processing the tragedy, but her hands, wringing a tissue nervously, betrayed a tension she couldn't entirely mask. Reynolds and Sullivan decided to examine the staircase more closely. Photos taken during the initial investigation showed minor discrepancies, scratches on the handrail that didn't appear consistent with a simple fall, a small scuff mark on the carpet at the top step, and dust disturbed in ways that suggested a struggle. Nothing definitively pointed to foul play yet, but each detail added a shadow of doubt over Elaine's account. Neighbors were interviewed again, this time more extensively. One neighbor, who had occasionally helped Margaret with groceries, mentioned that she had overheard a heated argument between mother and daughter just a week before the accident. The details were vague, but the tone was unmistakable. Elaine had demanded that Margaret consider selling the house, and Margaret had refused, saying, "I will not be rushed into giving up my life for what you want." Detective Reynolds also learned something curious from Vivian Harper, Margaret's younger sister. Vivian had been close to her sister and had visited frequently. She described Elaine as affectionate, but sometimes controlling, particularly when it came to household decisions. Vivian's voice, calm but firm, hinted at an uneasy tension she had noticed over the years. Elaine loves her mother, but sometimes it's more about what she wants than what mom needs. I never thought it would go this far, though. The detective's attention soon turned to digital evidence. Elaine's phone, examined under a warrant, revealed searches that raised questions. How to make a fall look accidental? Insurance payouts for household accidents? What counts as accidental death? Each query was brief and spaced over several months, seemingly innocuous, but combined with the tense family dynamic, they painted a troubling picture. The coroner's final report added more fuel to the investigation. While Margaret's injuries were consistent with a fall, there were subtle marks on her wrists and forearms, faint bruising that could have been caused by trying to protect herself or possibly restrain movements. The pattern was irregular, not definitive evidence of foul play, but enough to raise eyebrows. As Reynolds and Sullivan pieced together the timeline, a chilling possibility emerged. Margaret Lawson may not have simply fallen. Someone could have intentionally caused her to tumble, and the question of who and why hung heavily over the investigation. Detectives also began to notice small behavioral inconsistencies in Elaine. She was polite, composed, and cooperative in interviews, yet her eyes often flicked toward the staircase when discussing her mother's death. She repeated phrases mechanically, as if rehearsing a script she hoped no one would question. It was clear to Reynolds that the key to unraveling the truth lay in the intersection of family history, financial motivation, and forensic evidence. Every lie left small cracks, and every omission was a shadow in the otherwise spotless home. Detective Reynolds realized that Elaine Lawson was no longer just a grieving daughter. She had become the central figure in a web of questions, suspicions, and secrets, and unraveling it would require careful, methodical investigation into the darker side of familial love. The next step was clear: to dig deeper into Elaine's actions in the days leading up to her mother's death. Every detail, every seemingly insignificant move could reveal the truth behind the tragic staircase fall. Detective Reynolds returned to the Lawson residence in mid-November, determined to leave no detail unexamined. Every corner of the house seemed ordinary at first glance: polished floors, neat furniture, and a lingering scent of cinnamon from Margaret's favorite coffee. But detectives knew the smallest clues often held the key to the truth. Elaine Lawson continued to maintain her story that her mother's death was a tragic accident. She had been in the kitchen when Margaret lost her footing on the staircase. "I was pouring coffee," she insisted, voice steady, "and I heard a thud. By the time I got to her, it was too late." Yet the detectives noticed discrepancies in her timeline. Security footage from a neighbor's front camera, though grainy, showed Elaine leaving the house briefly that morning. She returned moments before the call to 911. When Reynolds pressed her for details, Elaine claimed she had gone outside to retrieve the morning newspaper. But the footage also captured Elaine pausing at the top of the stairs, lingering just long enough to suggest she might have checked the scene before discovering her mother. Reynolds and Sullivan began to look at the house more closely for forensic evidence. Dust patterns on the banister, the faint smear of what appeared to be blood, and subtle carpet impressions suggested a struggle that did not match a simple slip. The pattern of bruising on Margaret's wrists also aligned with this possibility: defensive wounds caused by someone trying to fend off a sudden push or hold. Digital forensics provided further insight. Elaine's phone revealed messages she had deleted but were recoverable by investigators. One thread between Elaine and a close friend read like a rehearsal for an alibi. "Mom's going to be hard to deal with today. I just hope nothing goes wrong." Another message, timestamped the night before the fall, said, "Tomorrow she can't get in the way." Reynolds felt a chill reading the words. They weren't outright threats, but in context with the accident, they hinted at forethought. The detectives also reviewed Elaine's social media activity. Over the previous month, she had searched for topics such as accidental falls that look natural, household accidents, and life insurance accidental death clauses. Nothing illegal on its face, but when combined with the timeline, these searches raised suspicions about premeditation. Interviews with family friends painted a portrait of tension simmering under the surface. Elaine had been increasingly frustrated with her mother, who resisted giving up her independence. Friends described Elaine as impatient and controlling, particularly when discussing the house and estate. One friend, speaking on condition of anonymity, said Elaine loved her mom, but she had her own agenda. You could see it in how she insisted things go her way. Vivian Harper, Margaret's younger sister, became an essential part of the investigation. She described moments that seemed innocuous at the time but now suggested long-standing friction. During visits, she had overheard arguments about the estate, the house, and inheritance. Margaret had made it clear she trusted Vivian with her belongings over Elaine. "Mom always said Elaine would take what she wanted if she could," Vivian said quietly. "I didn't think she'd go that far, but I guess some people surprise you." Evidence from the law firm managing Margaret's estate added another layer. The records confirmed that Margaret had recently updated her will in secrecy, ensuring Elaine would receive only a small portion. The timing of the update, just weeks before her death, seemed suspicious in hindsight. It suggested a possible motive, a daughter angry about being disinherited. Reynolds knew they were circling in on the truth, but nothing was yet conclusive enough to charge Elaine with murder. The pieces fit together like shards of glass. The suspicious searches, the inconsistent timeline, the minor forensic discrepancies, and the subtle bruises on Margaret's body. Each alone could be explained away. Together, they formed a pattern that could not be ignored. The detectives also uncovered a surprising detail in the household ledger. Margaret kept for years a meticulous account of her finances. In the week before her death, Elaine had withdrawn cash, made unrecorded purchases, and even borrowed items from the house that were not accounted for. The amounts were small, almost trivial, but Reynolds recognized the significance. They showed Elaine acting with secrecy, knowing her mother was fully aware of the house and its contents. By the end of Part 3, Detective Reynolds realized something critical. The investigation had moved from suspicion to a strong circumstantial case. Elaine Lawson's carefully constructed narrative was unraveling, piece by piece. Each fact, each minor inconsistency, was another thread pulling toward a truth that could not remain hidden. The stage was set for the next phase, confronting Elaine with the mounting evidence, watching her reactions, and discovering whether her grief was genuine or carefully performed. The question loomed larger than ever. Had a daughter's resentment led to murder, or was this tragedy really an accident cleverly disguised? By late November, the Concord Police Department had gathered a mountain of evidence. Detective Reynolds and Detective Sullivan knew they were close, so close, in fact, that the next move could make or break the case. Elaine Lawson had maintained her composure for weeks, appearing the grieving daughter to anyone who observed her. But Reynolds had begun to notice small cracks in her demeanor, subtle fidgets, a quick avoidance of eye contact, a tightening of the jaw, behaviors that hinted she was carefully controlling the narrative. Reynolds and Sullivan requested a formal interview at the station. The room was cold and sterile, designed to strip away the comfort of home. The harsh fluorescent light highlighted Elaine's pale skin, and the faint scent of her perfume clashed with the clinical environment. "Elaine," Reynolds began calmly but firmly, "we've reviewed the scene, the coroner's report, and digital records. There are some inconsistencies we need you to explain." Elaine's eyes flicked toward the staircase photo displayed on the screen in front of her. I've told you everything," she replied softly, her voice steady, but her hands twitching slightly. "It was an accident. I didn't do anything wrong." Sullivan leaned forward. "Elaine, we have evidence that suggests otherwise. Messages on your phone, your searches about accidental deaths, and witness reports about tensions the week before. Can you explain why you were searching these things?" Elaine's composure faltered for a fraction of a second. I was scared. I didn't want anything to happen to my mom. I was worried she might slip. I never meant for this to happen." Her words were rushed, almost rehearsed, but the detectives noticed a subtle shift, a hint of defensiveness that suggested fear of being caught. Physical evidence also began to speak more loudly. A microscopic analysis of fibers found on Margaret's wrist suggested that someone had grabbed her forearm moments before the fall. The direction of the fibers indicated force applied from behind, consistent with a push rather than a stumble. Dust and residue patterns on the top steps confirmed that someone had been moving in an unusual way, possibly guiding her mother toward the edge of the staircase. The detectives' suspicions were now paired with something far more tangible than behavioral clues or digital searches. They could point to patterns, timing, and force. The pieces were converging toward a single narrative. This was no accident. Yet Reynolds knew they needed more, the final proof that could withstand scrutiny in court. That breakthrough came in an unexpected way. A security camera installed in the backyard captured Elaine returning from a brief walk around 6:50 a.m., just minutes before she called 911. Her behavior, calm and deliberate, contradicted her statement of immediately discovering the accident. There was no sign of panic. She lingered near the back door, appearing to check the inside of the house without entering fully. The detectives confronted her with the footage. "Elaine, this video doesn't match your timeline. You weren't rushing to help your mother. You were lingering. Why?" Her lips trembled, and for a moment her carefully constructed facade cracked. I don't know. I thought she might have fallen, but I didn't want to make it worse," she whispered. The pause was long enough for Reynolds to see the internal struggle, the battle between instinctive denial and the weight of mounting evidence. The final shock came when a forensic accountant traced unusual withdrawals from Margaret's checking account in the weeks prior to her death. Small amounts seemingly insignificant on their own, but when combined with Elaine's recent searches and behavioral inconsistencies, they suggested planning and intent. It was a pattern, Reynolds realized, that fit a chilling narrative of premeditation. Detective Reynolds had everything she needed to confront Elaine with the full weight of circumstantial and physical evidence. The daughter who had once seemed grieving, cooperative, and composed was now on the edge of exposure. The web of deceit, carefully woven over months, was unraveling thread by thread. The crucial question remained: when faced with undeniable proof, would Elaine confess, maintain her story, or crumble under the scrutiny? December 2nd, 2021. The Concord Police Department interrogation room felt colder than usual. Detective Reynolds sat across from Elaine Lawson, flanked by Detective Sullivan and a plainclothes officer taking notes. On the table lay the compiled evidence messages, financial records, surveillance footage, forensic reports. Each item told a story that no amount of grief could explain away. Elaine shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her hands clasped tightly together. "I've told you everything," she said quietly, but her voice lacked conviction. Her eyes darted nervously to the photos of the staircase. The top step circled in red, the smudge of blood highlighted. Reynolds leaned forward, her tone calm but unyielding. "Elaine, we know about the messages you sent, the searches on your phone, and the financial activity in the days before your mother's death. We know about the fiber on her wrist and the dust patterns on the stairs. This wasn't an accident." Elaine's composure faltered. Her lips parted, then pressed together. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Reynolds continued, carefully pacing the psychological pressure. "Your mother updated her will. She made it clear you would receive very little. The house, the investments, everything left to her sister in charities. You had motive, opportunity, and we have evidence of your actions that morning. Elaine, we can prove what happened." Tears welled in Elaine's eyes, but for a long moment, she said nothing. The silence in the room was suffocating, a tense pause pregnant with revelation. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I wanted her to listen. I wanted her to see I deserved more." Reynolds noted every nuance. The hesitation, the guilt, the suppressed panic. "Elaine," she said gently but firmly, "did you push her?" Elaine's hands shook. I didn't think she'd fall like that. I just grabbed her arm. I just wanted her to stop arguing." Her confession was fragmented, almost a whisper of truth buried in layers of denial. With her admission, the detectives pieced together the sequence of that fatal morning. Elaine had confronted her mother about the house and the inheritance. An argument escalated at the top of the staircase. In a moment of frustration and desperation, she grabbed Margaret's arm to stop her, and her mother lost her balance, tumbling down the stairs. The fall was instantaneous, fatal, and irreversible. Physical evidence now aligned perfectly with the confession. The dust patterns, the fibers on Margaret's wrist, the bruises consistent with defensive action all pointed to a struggle. The surveillance footage confirmed Elaine's movements, the timing, and her deliberate behavior before the call to 911. And the messages and financial records revealed premeditated frustration, if not outright intent to manipulate events for personal gain. Elaine Lawson was arrested that day. Her confession, coupled with the overwhelming circumstantial and physical evidence, led to a swift indictment on charges of manslaughter and elder abuse. The community was stunned. Neighbors who had once seen Elaine as the polite, diligent daughter struggled to reconcile her public persona with the truth. Vivian Harper, though devastated by her sister-in-law's actions, expressed relief that justice had been served. "Mom wouldn't want this to go unpunished," she said quietly. "She always believed in fairness, and now, at least the truth is known." In the months that followed, the trial revealed further details about the tension between Elaine and Margaret. Testimonies painted a picture of a relationship strained by control, resentment, and unmet expectations. Elaine had long struggled with her mother's independence and the limitations imposed by the will. What began as frustration and ambition ultimately escalated into a moment of irreversible tragedy. Detective Reynolds reflected on the case with a mix of solemn satisfaction and lingering unease. The physical evidence and the digital trail and the psychological unraveling of Elaine Lawson had revealed the truth behind the fall, a truth far darker than anyone in Concord had imagined. The final scene at the Lawson home was quiet, almost eerily calm. The staircase, once the site of tragedy, stood empty. The photographs of Margaret lined the walls, her presence lingering in the shadows of the house she had loved. Justice had been served, but the echoes of that fatal morning would remain a chilling reminder that the line between love, resentment, and desperation could be tragically thin. And for Detective Reynolds, one thought lingered as she left the house. Sometimes the most ordinary tragedies hide the darkest human motives. And the truth, no matter how carefully concealed, always finds a way to surface. If you want to uncover more chilling true crime stories like Elaine Lawson's, make sure to subscribe to Criminal Minds Archives and hit the notification bell. Every case reveals the dark truths lurking behind ordinary lives, and you won't want to miss a single one. Stay curious, stay vigilant.